There's a room at St. Michael's Medical Center that nobody wants to mention during shift change. Not because it's cursed or haunted. Hospitals don't need ghosts when reality is already heavy enough. Room 37 simply ... holds things. Memories that stick to the walls, like the smell of disinfectant that never quite goes away. Dr. Emily Morrison knows this better than anyone. It's 6:47 a.m. when she pushes open the door to 307 for the first time in 3 months. The last time she was here, a 52-year-old patient died in her hands while she performed chest compressions that no longer made a difference. Her name was Margaret, mother of 2. High school history teacher. Emily still remembers the sound. Not the monitor flatlining, but the youngest son screaming in the hallway when he got the news. Since then, she'd requested not to be assigned to 307. But today, there's no choice. The hospital is at capacity, the cardiology wing overflowing, and a new patient just arrived. "Doctor, the woman in 307 is awake," the nursing assistant's voice echoes down the corridor. She's asking if she can open the window. Emily takes a deep breath, holds the clipboard against her chest like a shield, and enters. The woman in the bed has the kind of face that tells stories before she even opens her mouth. Deep lines around her eyes, not from suffering, but from someone who's laughed a lot in life. Short silver hair, disheveled from the hospital pillow. She's sitting up, trying to reach the curtain with her left hand while her right is tethered to an IV line. "Good morning, Emily," speaks on autopilot, the tone she's used for 7 years in the profession. Neutral, safe, distant. "Good morning, doctor." The woman smiles, and there's something in that smile that's unsettling. It's genuine. "I got the room with a view." "Huh. For the price Medicare doesn't charge, I thought I'd at least get a decent little window." Emily almost smiles. "Almost. I'm Dr. Morrison, the cardiologist responsible for your case. She looks at the clipboard. ... Dorothy Hayes, 68 years old, diagnosed with congestive heart failure, with a history of breast cancer treated 3 years ago. "That's right," Dorothy confirms, and her smile doesn't diminish even a millimeter. "But you can just call me Dorothy. Ma'am makes me feel old, and I've still got too much to do before I accept that." For the first time in months, Emily feels something different from weight when entering 307. It's not exactly lightness, the room would never allow that, but it's curiosity. Who is this woman who smiles in a hospital bed as if she were at a morning cafe? If you've ever been through a hospital, whether as a professional, patient, or visitor, you know, every room has its own energy. And 307 was about to change again. The medical routine follows its protocol. Cardiac auscultation, blood pressure, questions about pain, about sleep, about medications. Dorothy answers everything patiently, but Emily notices the gleam in the patient's eyes. She's measuring the doctor, reading between the lines, trying to discover who's behind the white coat. "Doctor, can I ask you a question?" "Of course." "You look tired." "Rough shift." Emily freezes. Patients don't usually ask about her. The dynamic has always been the opposite. She's the one who investigates. She's the one who discovers. She's the one who cares. Being seen in return is ... disconcerting. "I'm fine," she responds. Too quickly. "Okay," Dorothy agrees, but her tone clearly says, "I don't believe you, but I'll let it pass for now." Emily finishes the consultation and leaves the room with the strange feeling that something has changed. She doesn't know it yet, but 307 has just chosen its next victim. Not to destroy, to rebuild. James Anderson has seen too many people die in 307. 20 years of nursing leave marks. Not the visible scars of someone who works with their hands, but the invisible ones. Those that accumulate in the chest, layer upon layer, until you don't feel anything anymore. Or at least that's what James tells himself every time he closes a room door after declaring a death. He learned not to ask about grandchildren's names, not to look at family photos on the nightstand, not to get attached. But Dorothy didn't make things easy. "James," she calls him from the bed. On the 3rd day of hospitalization, "Are you going to tell me that this oatmeal is food? Or are we going to pretend together that I believed you?" He sighs, adjusting the four-stand. Miss Dorothy, the nutritionist, was very clear. Light diet, no salt, no sugar, No taste, no joy, no life, she completes. James, honey, if I'm going to die anyway, let it be with dignity. At least get me a bagel with cream cheese. You're not going to die. The silence that follows is heavy. Dorothy looks at him with that expression only people on the edge of finality can have, a mix of compassion and raw truth. James, she says slowly, I'm not stupid. I can read doctors' looks. I know what it means when you stop promising you'll be out of here soon and start talking about comfort. But that's okay. I've already lived. James feels the crack, that tiny fracture in the wall he's built around his heart. Lived, he asks, against all his self-preservation instincts. Danced in the rain. Raised a daughter on my own. Taught English to over 300 kids. Loved a good man, even if just for a little while. Planted an apple tree in the backyard that still bears fruit to this day. She pauses, looking at the window of 307. And you, James? Have you lived? The question hits him like a punch, because the real answer, the one he'd never say out loud, is no. Not since he buried his son at 12 years old. Victim of leukemia. Not since he decided that the only way to survive in a hospital was not to feel. And here's the truth. Nobody tells you about hospitals. Patients heal doctors as much as they're healed. Sometimes, even more. Emily passes B307 3 times a day, in the morning, mid-afternoon, and before leaving. It's protocol, she tells herself. But the truth is different. She's started to enjoy the conversations. Dorothy has a peculiar way of transforming the room. She brought a knitted afghan that her daughter made, hung across on the headboard, even though she says it's more superstition than faith, and insists on keeping the window open, even when the hospital air conditioning protests. Doctor, sit here for a minute. Dorothy asks on a Thursday afternoon. I have other patients. Miss Dorothy, I know, but they can wait 60 seconds. Emily hesitates. Then, surprisingly, sits in the chair beside the bed. You're carrying a weight. Go, Dorothy says, straight to the point. I saw it from the first day. I don't know what happened, but it's written all over you. You don't need to talk. Dorothy interrupts gently. You just need to know that holding weight alone hurts. And that this room here, she looks around. ... This room listens. It must have heard so much. Confessions, prayers, desperations. One more secret won't make a difference. Emily feels her throat tighten. It's been 3 months and 11 days since Margaret died. Since she failed, since 307 became her worst nightmare. I lost a patient here, she hears her own voice say, low, almost a whisper. I did everything right. CPR, defibrillator, epinephrine, everything. And still. And you think it was your fault? I'm the doctor. If she died, it's because I failed. Dorothy shakes her head slowly. Doctor, death isn't failure. It's destiny. You can delay it. You can negotiate. But you can't beat it. And you know why? She waits for Emily to look in her eyes before continuing. Because if you could, you wouldn't be a doctor. You'd be God. The words hang suspended in the air of 307. And for the first time in months, Emmeline feels that maybe, just maybe, the room isn't her enemy. On Dorothy's 10th day of hospitalization, everything changes. 307 has always had 2 beds, separated by a faded teal curtain that has seen better days. Until then, Dorothon occupied the room alone, a rarity at St. Michael's Medical Center, where gurneys accumulate in hallways like reminders of the American healthcare system's fragility. But in the early hours of a Friday morning, things change. James is finishing his shift change when he hears the alert over the radio. Critical patient coming from the ER, severe head trauma. Indus, Coma. Destination, 307. He feels his stomach turn, not because of the new patient, that's part of the job, but because of what this means for Dorothy. She was finally resting properly, away from the groans and mental confusion that often dominate crowded wards. James, Dr. Richardson's voice, neurosurgeon, echoes in the corridor. We're going to need constant monitoring. The guy is young, 28 years old, motorcycle accident, severe traumatic brain injury. Family is coming. Understood. They bring Michael on a gurney, surrounded by tubes, monitors, infusion pumps. The sound of the mechanical ventilator fills the room, an artificial rhythm of life sustained by machines. James pulls the curtain, creating a symbolic barrier between Dorothy and the new patient. But curtains don't block sounds, don't block the presence of death that hovers like fog. On the other side, Dorothy wakes with the movement. She says nothing, but James feels her gaze following each step, each ventilator adjustment, each vital sign check. When he finishes and goes to leave, she calls him. James. Yes, Miss Dorothy. Will he be okay? James should respond with the protocol. We're doing everything possible, but something in 307 destroys protocols. I don't know, he admits. Dorothy nods slowly. Then I'll pray for him. You don't even believe much in God. No, she agrees, but I believe in intention. An intention is what keeps us alive when everything else fails. There are silences that scream louder than any words. The silence of a body in a coma is one of them. Michael doesn't move, doesn't open his eyes, doesn't respond to stimuli, but his presence transforms 307 in a way no one expected. Emily enters the room the next morning and immediately feels the change. It's not just the additional equipment or the ventilator sound. It's something deeper. The room breathes differently now. Good morning, Miss Dorothy, she greets, trying to maintain normalcy. Good morning, Doctor. Did you meet our new roommate? Emily looks at the closed curtain. I'm not the doctor responsible for him. Dr. Richardson handles trauma cases, but you're the doctor for 307, Dorothy says with irrefutable logic, and he's in 307. So, in a way, he's yours too. Emily has no response to that. Because Dorothy is right. The room creates connections, whether you want it to or not. How are you feeling? She deflects, focusing on work. Physically. Tired. The heart can't handle the party anymore. Dorothy gives a weak smile, but emotionally, strangely at peace. At peace! Yeah, Doctor, you know when you feel you're exactly where you should be. Even if the place is a hospital bed, Dorothy looks at the curtain, separating the two beds. I think I ended up here for a reason. I don't know what yet, but there's a young man on the other side who's fighting alone. And I, who've already lived everything I had to live, can at least keep him company. Emily feels a lump in her throat, because she knows this feeling, the need to find purpose in pain, meaning in suffering. Miss Dorothy, she begins, but doesn't know how to finish. It's okay, Dr. Dorothy interrupts gently. You don't need to have the answers. Nobody does. We just pretend we do because it's easier than admitting we're all improvising. And it's in this moment that Emily understands. Dory isn't just dying. She's teaching. Each day in 307 is a lesson about how to live, even when life is ending. 3 days later, Michael's family appears. James is checking the monitors when he hears hurried footsteps in the corridor. A woman in her 50s rushes in, face marked by sleepless nights, eyes red and swollen. My son. Where's my son? Ma'am, please, calm down. James tries to use the gentlest tone possible. Michael is here, stable, but I need you to... She doesn't listen. Runs to the bed, grabs her son's hand as if she could pull him from the coma through the force of love. Michael, baby, it's Mom. I'm here. You're going to be okay. You need to wake up. You have to. Her desperation echoes in the room, and James feels familiar. Pain squeezes chest. How many times did he say the same words beside his own son's bed? How many times did he beg for a miracle that never came? From the other side of the curtain, he hears Dorothy move in bed. And then, surprisingly, she speaks. He knows you're here. Michael's mother stops, looks toward the voice. How? ... Even in a coma, they feel. Dorothy continues. Her voice firm despite physical weakness. They feel touch, voice, love. Keep talking to him. Keep holding his hand. He needs to know he has a reason to come back. The woman breaks down in tears. But now, there's something different. Not just desperation, but also James leaves the room because he needs to. Because if he stays one more second, he'll fall apart. He goes to the staff bathroom, locks the door, and for the first time in 15 years, lets the tears fall. 307 is breaking down his defenses, one crack at a time. And maybe that's exactly what he needs. Sarah arrives at St. Michael's Medical Center with a small suitcase and an enormous weight on her shoulders. Dorothy's only daughter, English teacher, 34 years old. Divorced for 2 years. No children, her life has always revolved around her mother, the strong woman who raised her alone, who never complained, who always had a smile, even when the world was falling apart. Now, seeing Dorothy with her in the 307 bed, Sarah feels like the ground is disappearing beneath her feet. "Mom," she says, trying to keep her voice steady, "I came to stay a few days with you. Took leave from work." "Honey, you don't need to," Dorothy begins. "Yes, I do," Sarah cuts in, and there's an urgency in her voice that reveals the fear behind it. "You're all I have." Dorothy extends her hand and Sarah holds it. Mom's fingers are cold, thinner than she remembered. "Sarah, sit here. We need to talk." "No, sweetheart." "I said no." "Mom?" Sarah's voice comes out louder than she intended. "We're not having that conversation. You're going to get better. You're going to get out of here. We're going to go home, and you're going to see the apple tree bear fruit again, and—" "Sarah." Dorothy's tone, firm, maternal, final, makes her daughter stop. "I'm not getting out of here, honey, and that's okay." "It's not okay." Sarah screams, and for the first time, crumbles. "How can it be okay? You're my mother. You can't leave me. I don't know how to live without you." Dorothy pulls her daughter into a hug. Even though it hurts, even though every movement is a battle against a body that's giving up. "Yes, you do," she whispers. I taught you to be strong, to hit bike up, to find beauty in small things, and you'll carry that with you." From the other side of the curtain, Michael's mother hears everything and cries too, because she recognizes the pain of someone losing someone they love. James enters the room later and finds 2 women, Sarah sitting beside Dorothy, holding her hand, and Michael's mother at the other end, doing the same with her son. 2 beds, 2 families, 2 different types of goodbye. He checks Dorothy's vital signs and sees what he already expected. Pressure dropping, irregular heartbeats, the body signaling the end. "Miss Dorothy," he says quietly, "want me to call Dr. Morrison? No need to bother the girl." But she pauses. ... "James, can I ask you something?" "Of course, tell me about your son." James freezes. Nobody asks about this. Nobody knows. He's kept this pain locked away for so long that sometimes he forgets it exists. "How did you... I know how to recognize loss when I see it," Dorothy says softly. "And you're carrying one big, old, the kind that changes who we are." He should leave, should make up some excuse, but 307 won't let him. "Daniel," he hears his own voice say. His name was Daniel. He died at 12 years old. Leukemia. "I'm so sorry. I worked here when it happened. I was a nurse, knew all the protocols, all the treatments, and still couldn't save him." James sits in the chair, as if his legs had given up supporting him. "Since then, I haven't. I don't let anyone in anymore, because if I don't get attached, it doesn't hurt when they leave." "And does it work?" Dorothy asks. "No," he admits. "For the first time in 15 years, it doesn't work at all." Dorothy smiles, and there's infinite tenderness in that smile. "James, honey, the pain of loving someone is part of the beauty of having loved. If you close your heart, you don't avoid pain. You just waste the joy." She squeezes his hand with what little strength she still has. "Your boy wouldn't want you living like this. Empty. Protected but dead inside." James doesn't respond, not because he doesn't want to, but because he can't. The tears he's held back for so long finally win, and he cries there, in 307, in front of a terminal patient who somehow became his salvation. There are truths that only emerge when we're at the edge of the abyss, and 307 was an abyss that forced everyone to look within. Emily enters the room that night, and immediately notices something has changed, not on the monitors or vital signs in the energy of the place. James is sitting beside Dorothy, talking quietly. Sarah sleeps in the chair, exhausted, and Michael's mother holds her son's hand, whispering prayers. Dr. Morrison, Dorothy, calls her, voice weak but determined. Come here. Emily approaches. Thank you, Dorothy says. For what? For letting me be part of your healing. Because that's what it's about, right? This room. It heals. Not always the body. Sometimes that's beyond our control. But it heals the soul. If we let Italiano? Emily feels the pressure in her chest, the one she's carried since Margaret died. Ms. Dorothy, you did the best you could. Dorothy interrupts. With that other patient, with all of them. And you'll keep doing it. But you need to stop carrying what isn't yours to carry. Death isn't your enemy, Doctor. It's just part of the story. Emily sits on the edge of the bed. I'm afraid, she confesses, voice breaking. Afraid of failing again. Afraid of losing you all. Afraid of feeling. I know. But fear isn't the problem. The problem is letting fear decide who you are. Dorothy coughs, and the sound is wet, heavy. She's getting worse. Promise me something. She asks, anything. When I go, you'll move forward. You'll enter this room again without weight. You'll remember that every patient who passes through here is a chance to make a difference. Not to save, because sometimes you can't, but to matter, to be human. Emily holds Dorothy's hand and nods, because she doesn't trust her own voice to respond. In the early morning hours, Dorothy's monitors begin to beep. James, who is on duty, runs to the room. Sarah wakes up startled. Emily, who is still in the hospital finishing paperwork, hears the alert over the intercom and runs. Protocol would be clear: CPR, defibrillator, epinephrine, but Dorothy had left clear instructions. No resuscitation, only comfort. Mom, Sarah screams, desperate. No, not yet. Dorothy opens her eyes, and they still have that gleam, that spark of life that defies biology. Sarah, my love, she whispers, it's time. I don't want to let you go. I know, but you'll be okay. You're strong. Stronger than you imagine. Dorothy looks at James. Take care of her for me, just until she leaves here? James nods, unable to speak. And then, surprisingly, she looks at the other bed at Michael, still in a coma, still fighting. And you, young man, she speaks as if he can hear. You, come back. Your mother needs you. You still have a story to live. The heart beats slow. Breathing becomes more spaced. And Dorothy Hayes, 68 years old, retired teacher, single mother breast cancer survivor, closes her eyes for the last time in room 307. But the strange thing is that, even with death in the air, there's no despair. There's sadness, yes. Pain, certainly. But there's also something no one expected. Gratitude. Gratitude for having known her, for having been touched by her, for having had the privilege of witnessing how someone can die with dignity, with purpose, with love. And it was in that moment that everyone in 307 understood. It doesn't matter how long we live, but how we live. And Dorothy had truly lived. The 3 days after Dorothy's death were the quietest 307 had ever experienced. Sarah left, carrying the knitted Afghan and the cross her mother left behind. James returned to routine, but something in him had changed. He no longer avoided eye contact, didn't close himself off as much, and Emily started entering the room without that suffocating weight in her chest. Dorothy's bed was occupied by an 81-year-old woman with pneumonia, who grumbled about everything but improved in 5 days, and was discharged. Then came a middle-aged man, awaiting heart surgery. Then a young woman with but Michael continued, motionless, trapped somewhere between life and death. It's been 2 weeks, his mother says, to James one gray afternoon. The doctors say the longer it takes. She doesn't finish the sentence. Doesn't need to. He's strong, James responds, and realizes he believes it. I've seen people wake up after much longer, but you've also seen people who didn't wake up, right? James could lie, but 307 taught him that truth hurts less than false hope. Yes, but I've also seen miracles. And Michael, he has a reason to come back. He has you." The woman smiles sadly. "You know, nurse, there's a time in the early morning when I'm alone here with him. Everyone's sleeping, just the sound of the machines. And I swear, I feel him hearing me. As if, deep down, he knows I'm here. He knows," James affirms. "A friend taught me that recently. Emily also feels Michael's presence differently now. She passes by 307 every afternoon, even though she's not the responsible doctor, and stays a few minutes observing the heart monitor, the ventilators, breathing patterns, the paleness of his young face. 'You're fighting, aren't you?' she whispers one day when she's alone in the room. 'In there, somewhere, you're deciding whether to come back or not. And I just wanted you to know, it's worth coming back.'" She stops, surprised by her own words, because she herself wasn't sure she believed that until now. But something in Dorothy, in the way she lived until her last breath, had changed Emily's perspective on everything. Death wasn't the failure. Giving up on living while still alive was. In the early morning hours of a Tuesday, 3 weeks and 2 days after the accident, something happens. Michael's mother is sleeping in the chair beside her son, exhausted from endless vigils, when she hears a different sound, not the constant beep of the monitor, but a change in rhythm, subtle but present. She opens her eyes, still confused between sleep and waking, and looks at her son, and then she sees it. Michael's fingers move, just a tremor, almost imperceptible, but real. She jumps from the chair, heart racing. "Michael, baby." James is at the nurse's station when he hears the scream coming from 307. He runs, prepared for the worst. It's always like that in hospitals. Screams rarely mean good news. But when he enters the room, he sees something different on Michael's mother's face. It's not despair. It's pure, raw, frightening hope. He moved. His fingers. I saw it. James approaches, professional, but feeling his heart accelerate. He takes Michael's hand, squeezes lightly, and waits. Nothing. Squeezes again. And then, small miracle. Immense. Michael's fingers squeeze back. "Oh my God!" James whispers. He activates the protocol immediately, calls the neurologist on duty, adjusts the ventilator parameters, checks pupils' motor responses, and with each test, Michael shows more signs, small but unmistakable, that he's coming back. Emily arrives at the hospital at 6 a.m. and is met by James in the corridor, his eyes shining in a way she's never seen. "Doctor, you need to see this." When she enters 307, Michael has his eyes still confused, still weak, but awake. His mother holds his hand, crying and laughing at the same time, repeating her son's name like an answered prayer. Emily feels something rise in her chest, a mixture of joy, relief, and something deeper. An understanding that not everything is lost, that sometimes, against all odds, life wins. "Welcome back," she says to Michael, her voice choked. He can't respond yet, but his eyes meet hers for a second. And in that second, there's recognition, gratitude, life. There are moments when medicine can't explain. Moments when faith, whether in God, in fate, or simply in the incomprehensible force of human will, becomes the only possible language. In the following days, Michael begins recovery. Slow, painful, full of challenges. But he's alive. He came back. And the strange thing is that everyone in 307, the doctors, nurses, even other patients who pass briefly through there, feel that somehow Dorothy played a role in this. As if, even after leaving, she was still fulfilling the promise made that, "Last night, you come back. Your mother needs you." James sits beside Michael's mother one calm afternoon. "He's going to be okay," she says, more to herself than to him. "Yes," James confirms. "It'll take time, physical therapy, patience, but he will. You know, nurse, I thought I'd lost my son. I was preparing to say goodbye." And then she looks at the empty bed on the other side, where Dorothy was. Then that woman came and changed everything. She had that gift. James agrees, feeling Dorothy's absence like a good pain, the kind that proves something important, existed. She talked to him, you know, on her last day, told him to come back. And I know it sounds crazy, but I believe he heard her. James smiles. It's not crazy. It's faith. And sometimes, faith is the most powerful medicine there is. Sarah returned to the hospital 2 weeks after her mother's death. She hadn't planned to. Had even avoided passing near St. Michael's. The grief, still too recent, too raw, but an inexplicable force brought her back. She needs to see 307 one more time. James finds her in the corridor. "Sarah," he says, surprised but happy. "How are you? Surviving?" She responds honestly. "Some days are better than others. But I'm trying to do what my mom wanted. Truly live. She'd be proud." Sarah looks at the door to 307. Can I go in?" "Of course." She pushes the door slowly, as if visiting a sacred place. The room is different. New patients, new sounds, new energy. But something remains. Something invisible, but palpable. It's Michael who's in the bed where her mother was. He's sitting up, eating with difficulty but determination. His mother beside him helping. "Hi," Sarah says quietly. Michael's mother looks at her and somehow maybe it's the common grief that unites people who pass through 307. Maybe it's something more. "You're her daughter, right?" the woman asks gently. "Miss Dorothy's?" Sarah nods. Emotional. "My son woke up," the woman continues. 2 days after she... after she passed. And I know in my soul that she had something to do with it. She always had a way of taking care of people, Sarah says, voice breaking, even when she herself needed care. Michael, with effort, looks at Sarah. His speech is still difficult, but he manages. "Thank you for your mother." And Sarah cries. But these aren't tears just of sadness. They're of understanding, of purpose. Because now she understands. Her mother's death wasn't in vain. She left marks. She changed lives. She mattered. Emily finds Sarah in the corridor as she's leaving. "Sarah." Dr. Morrison. Sarah wipes her tears. "Sorry, I shouldn't have come without warning. You don't need to apologize. This place, 307. I think it'll always be a little bit of all of us." They stand in silence for a moment. "Doctor, can I ask you a question?" "Of course. Did my mother help you?" "In the end, she said she wanted to help." Emily feels her throat tighten. "She did. She admits more than she ever know. She taught me that being a doctor isn't just about saving lives. It's about honoring them. Each one. Even the ones we can't save." Sarah smiles through tears. She was good at that. Teaching without seeming like she was teaching. She was. Emily agrees. "And I'll carry that with me." Forever they hug there, in the third-floor corridor, 2 women connected by a loss that somehow became a gain. 3 months pass. Michael is discharged after weeks of recovery and intensive physical therapy. He leaves 307 walking with support, his mother beside him, eyes full of tears of gratitude. Before leaving, he stops at the room's door and looks back. "Thank you," he says, not to the people, but to the room itself. As if 307 were a living entity that had guarded him while he fought to return. James, who's supervising the discharge, understands perfectly, because he feels the same. The room holds memories, holds stories, holds pieces of souls that pass through there. 307 continues functioning, as it always has. New patients arrive. Some improv and leave. Others don't. It's the natural cycle of a hospital. The relentless wheel of life and death turning without stopping. But something has changed in that room. The professionals feel it. The patients feel it. There's a small plaque now, discreet, that nobody officially authorized but that appeared anyway, fixed on the inside of the door. James placed it. Emily pretended not to see it. Hospital administration decided some things don't need formal authorization. The plaque says, "In memory of all who passed through here, you weren't just patients. You were teachers." Emily enters 307, now without fear, without weight, without guilt. One afternoon, while examining a new patient, a young woman with a congenital heart condition, scared but hopeful, She stops for a moment and looks around. "Doctor?" the young woman asks. "Did something happen?" Emily smiles. "No, it's just ... This room has a story." "A good story. And you're now part of it?" "What do you mean?" "Let me tell you." Emily pulls the chair and sits. "There was a woman who was here, Dorothy. She was dying, but still managed to teach all of us about how to live." And as Emily tells the story, the young woman listens attentively. Because stories heal. Stories connect. Stories give meaning to suffering. And 307 was, above all, a place of stories. James continues working his shifts, but now he talks with patients. Asks about their lives, looks at grandchildren's photos, remembers names. One day, a younger colleague asks, "James, why do you always spend so much time with patients? We barely have time to get everything done." James thinks about the answer, thinks about Daniel, his son, thinks about Dorothy, who taught him to open his heart again, thinks about everyone who passed through 307. "Because they're not numbers," he responds. "They're stories, and every story deserves to be heard." The colleague doesn't completely understand, but will one day, when life teaches him, just as it taught James. Sarah visits her mother's grave every week, brings flowers, shares news, and always ends the visit saying, "Thank you, Mom, for everything. For teaching me to live, even when you were dying." She went back to teaching, went back to going out with friends, went back to laughing, but she carries Dorothy with her, not as weight, but as light, as precious inheritance. And sometimes, on quiet nights, she swears she can hear her mother's voice. "That's it, honey. Keep going. You're doing great." St. Michael's Medical Center never stops. It's an immense machine that works 24 hours, 7 days a week, saving lives, losing battles, witnessing miracles and tragedies in equal measure. And in the middle of this machine, on the 3rd floor, there's a room that seems a little different from the others. Patients arrive scared, live transformed, whether by healing of body or healing of soul. Professionals enter skeptical, leave believers, not necessarily in God, but in something greater than themselves. Because 307 isn't just a room, it's a portal, a liminal space between what we were and what will become. If you've ever been through a hospital, as a patient, family member or professional, you know there are places that mark us, not because of walls or equipment, but because of the emotions we lived there, because of the encounters we had, because of the versions of ourselves we discovered when everything else was taken away. One night, long after all this, Emily is finishing her shift when she stops at the door of 307. The room is empty at the moment, awaiting cleaning for the next patient. She enters, turns on the bedside light, and sits in the chair where so many families cried, prayed, waited. "Hi, Dorothy," she says to the air. "I know you're not here. Or maybe you are, somehow. I don't know. I never knew how to deal well with these faith things." She smiles to herself. "But I wanted to thank you for teaching me that losing patience isn't failing. It's part of being human. And that the important thing isn't saving everyone, because that's impossible. The important thing is to matter to each one while they're here." She stands up, turns off the light, and goes toward the door. Before leaving, she looks back one last time and swears, though she knows it's just imagination, just a need to believe in something greater, that she feels warmth in the room, like an invisible hug, like a silent blessing. Until next time, she whispers and closes the door gently, letting 307 rest until the next chapter of its infinite story. Years pass at St. Michael's Medical Center like waves in the ocean, always different, but fundamentally the same. 307 continues receiving patients, witnessing human dramas, keeping secrets that only hospital walls know. But there's a difference. The professionals who work there now, many who never knew Dorothy, never saw Michael wake from his coma, never witnessed Emily and James's transformation, still feel something special in that room. There's a medical student doing her rotation, Jessica, 24 years old, idealistic, but scared by the brutal reality of the profession. She's accompanying a terminal patient in 307, and the pain of seeing someone die for the first time is destroying her certainties. I don't know if I can do this, she confesses to James, who still works there, now with completely white hair but the same kind gaze. James smiles, that smile of someone who's been in the same place. Let me tell you a story, he says, and pulls up a chair, about a woman named Dorothy, who died here, in this room, a few years ago. And he tells it. Not all the details, but the essential parts, about how Dorothy taught that dying with dignity is as important as living with purpose, about how 307 has a way of transforming everyone who passes through. Jessica listens, and something inside her calms down, because understanding that suffering can have meaning, that death can have beauty, even being tragic, changes everything. Thank you, she says. Don't thank me, James responds. Tank ten. Tank them. He points to the room. Everyone who passed through here, each patient was a teacher. Each story was a lesson. And 307, well, 307 is where we keep those lessons. Emily became head of the cardiology department 5 years after that night, when Dorothy died. She changed protocols, implemented emotional support programs for professionals, created conversation groups among doctors so no one has to carry the weight alone. But what she values most is a tradition that started without formal authorization. Every new resident who enters the department spends a full day in 307, not to learn techniques, to learn humanity. This room, she says to the new class each year, is where you'll understand that medicine isn't pure science. It's art, it's empathy. It's knowing that sometimes the greatest healing we can offer isn't a medication, but presence. The young doctors listen, some skeptical, others curious. But without exception, when they spend time in 307, they understand. Sarah got married again, had a daughter named her, Dorothy, obviously, and every year, on the anniversary of her mother's death, she returns to St. Michael's Medical Center with little Dorothy, now 7 years old, and tells the story of the grandmother she never met. Was Grandma strong? The girl asks, the strongest who ever existed. Sarah responds, even when she was dying, she was teaching others to live. They stand in the corridor in front of 307. Don't enter because there are patients there, but Sarah looks through the small window in the door and smiles. Thank you, Mom, she whispers, for everything. Michael, the young man who woke from the coma, returned to 307 only once after his discharge. It was on the first anniversary of his recovery. He wanted to personally thank all the professionals who cared for him. When James sees him at the door, the nurse's eyes fill with tears. Michael, James. They hug like old friends. I came to thank you for not giving up on me. I didn't do anything. You're the one who fought. But you guys gave me a reason to fight, Michael insists. You and that woman, Dory. My mom told me she talked to me, told me to come back, and you came back. I did. Micah confirms, and now I'm living. Truly. Because if I got a second chance, I'm not going to waste it. He now works as a paramedic. Decided he wanted to help save lives after his was saved. And every time he enters a hospital, he remembers 307. The smell, the sounds, the feeling of being suspended between worlds, and gives thanks. There are places in the world that are just geographic coordinates, and there are places that become part of who we are. 307 is one of those places. 10 years pass since Dorothy's death. St. Michael's Medical Center undergoes renovations, new paint, modern equipment, updated protocols. But when the maintenance crew arrives at 307, there's a discussion. We're going to replace everything here, the supervisor says. New bed, paint, flooring? No. James interferes. He's close to retirement now, but still has authority. 307 stays. As it is, but nurse, the room is old. It needs... I know, James cuts in. But this room has history, and history isn't erased with new paint. Emily supports it. Hospital management, surprisingly, does too. Because over the years, the legend of 307 has spread. Doctors from other hospitals come to visit. Students ask to do rotations there. Patients, even with fear, feel a strange peace when admitted to that room. It's as if 307 had become more than a physical space. It's a symbol of hope, of humanity, of everything medicine should be, but sometimes forgets to be. James retires. On a rainy Friday, his colleagues organize a party in the hospital cafeteria. There's cake, there are speeches, there are tears, but what James most wants is one last visit to 307. Emily accompanies him. They enter the empty room and stand there in silence for long minutes. So many stories, right? James finally says, "So many lives." Emily completes. "Do you think she knew?" James asks. "Dorsa, do you think she knew the impact she'd leave?" Emily thinks. "I think she knew that life is about leaving marks, and that marks don't need to be big. They just need to be real." James nods. "I'm going to miss this place. You can come back whenever you want. As a visitor, it won't be the same." "No," Emily agrees, "but the lessons continue. With each new professional who passes through here, with each patient who teaches something new. 307 doesn't need us to keep doing its magic. They leave the room together, and when the door closes, there's a feeling of closure, but not of ending. Because stories never truly end. They just transform into other stories." 20 years after all this, there's a documentary being filmed at St. Michael's Medical Center. The theme, Places That Heal Beyond Medicine. And, obviously, 307 is featured. They interviewed Emily, now retired but still a hospital consultant. They interview Michael, who became a writer and wrote a book about his experience in the coma. They interview Sarah, who brought her daughter Dorothy, now a young adult, studying to be a nurse. And they interview current patients who are in 307. Each tells their own story. Each speaks about how the room has a different energy, how feeling cared for there goes beyond medications and procedures. The documentary ends with a simple scene, the camera entering empty 307 at dawn. Soft light coming through the window, the distant sound of heart monitors from other rooms. And a narration, "There are places we keep in our hearts, not because they were perfect, but because they were real." Room 307 at St. Michael's Medical Center is one of those places. Here, thousands of people passed through. Some left healed, others left at peace, but all, absolutely all, left something of themselves and took something with them. This room isn't special because it has better equipment or more brilliant doctors. It's special because, somehow, over the years, it learned to hold stories, to honor lives, to remember that in the end, what matters isn't how long we live, but whether we truly lived. Room 37 was never the same again since it started keeping these stories, and, in a strange and beautiful way, neither is anyone who passes through here. The camera slowly pulls back, the door to 307 closes, and life in the hospital continues, as it always continues. Because hospitals are places of constant movement, of eternal cycle between arrivals and departures. But if you stop, if you quiet down for a moment, if you really pay attention, you'll hear the voices of everyone who passed through there. Not as ghosts, but as kagos, as living memories, as lessons that refuse to die. You'll hear Dorothy laughing, making jokes about the tasteless oatmeal. You'll hear James learning to open his heart again. You'll hear Emily forgiving herself. You'll hear Michael fighting to come back. You'll hear Sarah saying goodbye and learning to move forward. And you'll understand that 307 was never just a room. It was a teacher, a healer, a keeper of stories. A reminder that, in the end, what makes us human isn't avoiding pain, but finding meaning in it. It isn't conquering death, but honoring life while it lasts. And that each of us, professionals, patients, family members, carries our own room 307 within us. That place where we learned the hardest lessons, where we were broken and rebuilt, where we discovered we're stronger and more fragile than we ever imagined. Room 307 at St. Michael's Medical Center is still there. Patients come and go, doctors work, families wait, and the walls continue keeping secrets. Stories. Pieces of souls that pass through there, because in the end, places aren't made of bricks and cement. They're made of memories. of emotions, of people who mattered. And room 307. Room 307 was never the same again. Neither are we. After passing through it, if this story touched you in any way, it's because you recognize the truth in it. We all have our room 307s. Those moments, places, or people that transformed us forever. And perhaps the greatest tribute we can pay them is to live with more intention, love with more courage, and remember that our passage through this world, however brief, can leave marks that continue healing long after we're gone. Sometimes, medicine isn't in the drugs, but in the stories we share. And you? What's your room? 307.